reached the voicemail of Chris Lawrence. I can't come to the phone right now because I need absolute detachment. Complete freedom. And to be the castaway on a desert island of dreams.
We all spend a lot of time poring over satellite imagery, trying to understand the nuclear programs of Iran and North Korea. I mean, I've spent hours just monitoring snowmelt patterns on the roof of a single building in North Korea and calculating what those patterns can tell us about the status of the uranium centrifuges. And there's obviously a lot of motivation to be the first one to discover that next secret facility, or to develop that next observational technique to sort of see through the veil. And so, of course, whenever there's an intelligence leak or a tip floating around, it's really an exciting time for us because there are all these fascinating areas that kind of fill in the details about, an alleged construction project or some secret nuclear experiment that supposedly took place somewhere in a desert.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to show you new and conclusive proof of the secret nuclear weapons program that Iran has been hiding for years from the international community in its secret atomic archive. We're going to show you Iran's secret...
When Bibi Netanyahu held his press conference in 2018 about the nuclear files that Israeli intelligence claimed to have stolen out of Iran, it was like a gold rush for us. Because, look, we'd been watching some of these buildings in Iran through the satellite imagery for over a decade and sketching out the technical possibilities and the boundaries of any experiments that could have taken place inside those buildings. And now here in this press conference were pictures of the interiors of those buildings, along with administrative documents, design schematics, laboratory notes. It was like we were suddenly inside the program. It's as if, imagine you've been wondering for years what's inside some locked door. And then one day you find that door slightly cracked and no one there to keep you out. And the interesting thing was that at the end of the day, the policy takeaway on Iran's nuclear program was the same as it ever was. I mean, if these alleged experiments really took place, they happened close to 20 years ago. And then according to CIA estimates, Iran decided not to build the bomb. Yet here we are, gathering around these images, filling in the details. How did Iran's neutron initiator work? How big was the air gap between their shockwave generator and the uranium core? How spherically uniform was the implosion wavefront in their hydrodynamic simulations? There are a lot of movements of thought in this experience of uncovering hidden facts in Iran. A lot of metaphors and mental images that are very familiar to me. You start to wonder, what's going on here? Why are these metaphors and images so moving to me? It sometimes feels like these leaks are speaking directly to me. So someone had found some center in me. This is very frightening. I mean, I remember the media spectacle surrounding weapons of mass destruction leading up to the Iraq War. and how it was experts in the non-governmental arms control community who had to push back against those narratives. That's why I became a nuclear scientist. And scientists are not supposed to be getting drawn in to this sort of thing. Scientists are not supposed to get drawn into this sort of thing. So I've set out to try to understand where this experience is coming from historically, and how much these metaphors may have influenced what I think I know about the Iran and North Korean nuclear programs. So the first thing I did was to go back to the very beginning with Iran, and to look at that first facility that was revealed back in 2002. So the Natanz facility was a uranium enrichment plant that Iran was building back in the early 2000s. And the thing to remember about that site is that it wasn't really a violation of international law, because at the time it was just a construction site. And so you can imagine Iran finishing that construction, declaring the facility to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and then maybe just using it to fuel their civilian power reactor. But before any of that happened, a Washington-based NGO used commercial satellite imagery to identify the site. And the public experience of that revelation was quite dramatic, because sub-meter resolution commercial satellite imagery had just become available to the public at the time. And so for a lot of us, it was our first glimpse at that technology. And of course, at the time, the US government was out to lunch trying to conjure up a WMD program in Iraq. And along comes this group of non-governmental scientists to geolocate a secret uranium enrichment program in the desert of Iran. And then to lead a television audience through their analysis on CNN. And at the time, this seemed to challenge the Bush administration, who wanted to keep the focus on Iraq. But this is really the beginning of the Iran nuclear crisis, because once that first facility was revealed, it seemed like every couple of months there was some new revelation in the images, like the Iranians are digging over here, or they're paving over this site over there, and what could they be hiding? And each time you have a larger and larger community of arms control experts, journalists, and even hobbyists poring over these satellite images to uncover these nuclear secrets. So I want to go back and track how this community has grown and solidified with each iteration of this collective thought exercise. So on one hand, I'm tracking the themes and metaphors that animate our technical analyses and shape how we think about nuclear dangers. And on the other hand, I'm mapping the observational technologies themselves, as well as the networks of professional relationships and interlocking skill sets that spreads with each iteration of this process. I'm always looking for ways to get my thought process out of my computer, out of my head, and into physical space. And when you're studying a media community using machine learning techniques on your laptop, things can start to feel pretty detached and ephemeral. But with the community of non-governmental experts that carries out open source nuclear nonproliferation analysis, you're dealing with a pretty manageable corpus. I mean, you can think of less than 100 academics, experts, and journalists who really make up the main lobe of nuclear nonproliferation arms control discourse in this country. And they play a big role in shaping the public debate about nuclear dangers. And I'm also a part of that community, so I bring a bit of ethnographic knowledge, sort of by default. So I thought, why not connect the dots the old-fashioned way? This allows me to conduct a much closer read and a thicker description, And I'm also starting to see some temporal structures that I might have missed with a more automated approach. So the first step was to line up the locations in Iran where alleged nuclear facilities have been geolocated over the years, and then mark out in time all of the satellite imagery taskings over those areas since 2002. Then, for each historical moment of revelation, I'm plotting the NGO analyses that were utilizing those images to geolocate and identify the facility of interest, as well as other technological resources that they were utilizing, and then these citation networks as these analysts were in conversation with one another. From there, the images would get taken up by various media outlets who were reporting on these revelations, and so you get these sort of shoots or floral structures as the images would be sort of streaking across the media sphere. And as these analysts and reporters are carrying out this exercise of revelation over and over again, a broader dendritic structure emerges, which gets thicker and more interconnected with each iteration. Plotting in this way, you can also see that the revelatory exercise has its own characteristic time structure to it. So as an example, we can look at the public analysis of Iran's Fordo enrichment plant, which was revealed in 2009. So to begin with, there's always some sort of leak or piece of information from a government that kind of spurs the community into action. And once that leak is out, analysts will quickly begin trying to geolocate the facility of interest, and this can often have the appearance of sort of a race among analysts to be the first one to find and identify the site. And you can see this in the plot. I call it the geolocation branch of the revelatory structure. Next, analysts will begin to debate the legality of the site, and in this case, they were looking back at the archives of old satellite images, trying to find out when construction first began, since, in their view, that would have some bearing on when Iran would be required to declare the facility. So that would be the legality branch of this particular iteration. And finally, there are the breakout time debates. So many analysts have their own pet model of Iran's R1 centrifuge, and they'll use that to put forth competing SWU rate calculations for just how long it would take to enrich enough uranium at this facility if Iran were to choose to break out of the Nonproliferation Treaty and build a bomb. And those debates have their own branch. And throughout these debates, the images are bouncing back and forth like sparks between the analytic and journalistic communities. And this dendritic structure seems to recur now endlessly. It's essentially become its own kind of media cycle. But the problem here is that there's never any real point of closure. At the end of the day, we're still always left with the same set of alluring mysteries. So how close did Iran really get to the bomb? And if they chose to build the bomb today, how long would it take them? This emergent structure is sort of built and conditioned to ask this same question in one form or another over and over again. The analogy that comes to mind is that it's sort of like a form of muscle memory. So each time these collective imaginative movements take place, the connections are becoming a bit thicker, the movements more refined and pronounced, and the response times are becoming quicker and sharper. So for instance, these geolocation and breakout time branches were actually present in nascent form during that first revelation back in 2002. But the neural pathways, so to speak, took over a year to wind through those movements. By 2009, with the 4.0 revelation, those branches are all lighting up in quick succession in a matter of weeks. And always ending with a question mark, never reaching closure. Analogy of muscle memory flows into the kind of anatomical insight that I think is so alarming about the arms control nuclear nonproliferation community. Because of course the basic theory of arms control is that when countries have questions about whether or not their neighbors are building nuclear weapons, those questions can lead to arms races. And if we can create more international transparency so we can resolve those questions, we might be able to avert those arms races. But what if the expert community that has taken up that task develops within itself a structure or an anatomy, so to speak, whose characteristic movement is to wonder? In other words, what if the observational technologies and the shared sensibilities that string our community and our knowledge together do so in such a way that it acquires a kind of anatomical predisposition not to resolve those questions, but to endlessly raise them, and to sustain them in a way that can block effective arms control. So whether it's the endless questions about the possible military dimensions of Iran's now decades dormant nuclear experiments, or the search for North Korea's secret uranium enrichment plants or secret missile bases that seem to always resurface right when a diplomatic agreement seems to be just within reach. If that's the case, then if we really want to avert the next arms races, we may need to work against our own enemy, against our own shared sensibilities as experts, and to resist the itch of that next set of mysteries out there in the desert.